We are now at a very important stage in the course. In the previous lectures, we have learnt about how sensors are used to record images. We have learnt about the nature of reflected sunlight and Earth thermal emission as sources of Earth data. We have noted how the atmosphere affects the transmission of radiation from the sun to the surface and to the sensor, and how we can correct for image errors in brightness and geometry. Effectively, that means we are now at the stage of having acquired good quality data ready for analysis. The rest of our course depends upon having reached this stage satisfactorily. There are two very broad approaches that can be taken when endeavouring to interpret images recorded by a remote sensing platform. The first involves a person doing most of the work. A person skilled at interpreting an image visually is called a photo interpreter, and the process overall is called photo interpretation. This is a long-standing method for interpreting images that goes back to the days of air photo interpretation. The analyst builds up substantial knowledge of how to look at the various cues and clues in an image in order to extract meaningful information. The second approach, which is much more recent, involves the use of sophisticated computer algorithms to help undertake an analysis. A human is still involved, but their skills are more in knowing how to get the best results out of the computer-based approach than being able to interpret the images themselves. When computers are involved in the interpretation process, the approach goes by a number of names, including quantitative analysis, classification, or machine learning. More recently, artificial intelligence methods have been contemplated for remote sensing image analysis. We will say something about that later in our course. We will now examine both photo interpretation and quantitative analysis in general terms, but the major emphasis of the remainder of this course is on the computer approach. Let's start with photo interpretation. A skilled analyst works with a colour image product composed from the recorded image bands, or sometimes with the individual bands themselves displayed as black and white. Irrespective of whether black and white or colour imagery is used, the analyst makes use of colour or relative differences in brightness from band to band and relationships between objects and pixels in order to carry out interpretation. Changes with time of features from one image to another in a co-registered set are also important clues for the photo interpreter. Because an analyst relies on understanding brightness and colour, it is important that we know how colour image products are formed if we want to appreciate the nature of the products with which a photo interpreter works. As you probably appreciate from your own knowledge of digital photography or colour television, a colour image is made up of 3 black and white images displayed on each of the 3 primary additive colours of blue, green and red. Keep in mind that an individual band of image data is always represented from black to white, that is, lowest brightness to highest brightness, even though it might represent, say, the reflectance of the Earth's surface in the red wavelength range, for example, seen through a red filter. A challenge in remote sensing is to know which bands to display in which colours. We only have 3 display colours, but we could have tens or hundreds of bands of image data from which to choose. We illustrate in this slide 3 different colour images formed from different band combinations using data recorded by the HIMAP hyperspectral sensor. Remember, you have to choose which bands to display in each of the red, green and blue colour primaries. On the left-hand column of images, we have chosen a recorded visible red band to display as red, a visible green band to display as green, and a visible blue band to display as blue. The result is a natural colour image where the vegetation appears green, and urban and other developed surfaces take on a brownish or slightly bluish appearance. In the centre column, we have created what is commonly called a colour infrared image. It is based upon the choice of bands long used in colour infrared aerial photography. A near-infrared band is displayed as red, a visible red band is displayed as green, and a visible green band is displayed as blue. Although this sounds unusual, it gives a very rich colour product in which healthy vegetation having a high near-infrared response shows as red, and bare regions show as shades of blue and green. Clear water generally displays as black. In the right-hand column, we show a colour image product made up from a set of infrared bands. As seen in the colour image, there is a fairly good differentiation of different cover types. Often an analyst will experiment with bands to display, guided by their knowledge of the spectral reflectance characteristics of the Earth's surface cover types of interest in a particular interpretation exercise. Are there any conventions observed when forming colour image products? Well, the only real convention is that the bands are displayed in the same order of wavelength as the primary display colours. Therefore, the recorded band with the longest wavelength is shown as red, and that with the shortest wavelength is shown as blue. Once we form the colour image product, we have to work out how to interpret it. That requires reference back to the spectral reflectance characteristics of the different Earth surface cover types present in an image. On this slide, we have shown where three bands, green, red and near-infrared, are located on the reflectance spectra. When combined into the colour infrared composite, vegetation appears as red, soil and urban regions appear as blue and green, and water will appear as bluish-black, depending on its depth and turbidity. There is, however, an intervening step which you may have picked up by a careful examination of the spectral reflectance curves and the colour infrared product. From the spectral curves alone, it looks like all cover types should be predominantly reddish. Indeed, if the composite were formed from the raw data recorded by the platform, that will be the case. In practice, however, we undertake what is called a contrast enhancement step in order to get the colour product shown on the bottom right-hand side of the slide. We will see how to do that in the next lecture. In the early days of remote sensing, when instruments only had 3 or 4 wavebands, selection of which 3 to use when forming a colour composite product was quite straightforward. With modern instrumentation, however, the analyst is faced with a more complicated task to choose the bands to display. In some ways, this places more dependence on the analyst's knowledge of the spectral characteristics of the seen properties of interest. These quiz questions are important in terms of drawing your attention to the limitations of a human analyst, limitations which we expect will not be a problem when using a machine to assist with the interpretation.